Today's lesson is fire safety, fact versus fiction. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're talking about something called fire safety. Of course, in our modern lives, there is the risk, there is the possibility of running into a fire, either at work or in school or at home. And if this does happen, we need to be prepared, but we need to discuss the differences between what is true and what is not true. We need to discuss fact versus fiction.
Right. So fiction, as we normally know it, refers to a book or a story about imaginary things. So fiction would be the opposite of history if we talk about writing, if we talk about literature. But fiction can also mean things or events that are imaginary in general. So if somebody tells me about what they did over the weekend or something about their past, about their childhood, I could say, well, what they're saying isn't true. It's pure fiction. They're lying.
Exactly. So fact, of course, means truth. And then we've got fiction. And versus just means we're comparing these two things. That word is mostly used in sports competition. Today's game is between the Monkeys and the Guardians. It's the Monkeys versus the Guardians. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation about the title. Let's now go into the first part of our lesson. We'll listen to it first.
Fire safety, fact versus fiction. Depending on the context, fire can be both helpful and dangerous. It heats our homes and cooks our food, but it can also destroy almost anything in its path. Therefore, when it comes to fire safety, it's important to separate fact from fiction in order to know what to do in case of an emergency.
大家好，标题中我们来介绍介系词 versus， 它的意思是与点点点相比或与点点点竞争。例如 Renting a home versus buying one may be a better choice in the current economy. 在目前经济情况下，或许租房子跟买房子相比是更好的选择。又或者说 The novel deals with the classic theme of good versus evil. 这部小说涉及了经典的善与恶抗衡的主题。再来，我们看到名词 context， 它有事件的背景或环境、语境或上下文的意思。例如 You need to understand the historical context before reading the novel. 你在读这本小说之前，需要先了解它的历史背景。又或者说 The meaning of this word depends on the context in which it is used. 这个字的意思要依据其上下文的用法而定。
Depending on the context, fire can be both helpful and dangerous. So that is true. Fire can be something that helps us or it can be dangerous to us depending on the context. Now, the context is a situation in which something occurs. It can also be considered the background of an event. So, for instance, if you want to look at why World War II began, you would have to look at the social, historical, and economic context of Europe during that period. So depending on the context or depending on the background of a situation, the fire can be both helpful and dangerous. And here the phrase depending on just means relies on a situation to be true in order for something else to be true.
There you go. So context, of course, just talks about the particular situation, and it depends on the context. We need to understand the actual situation. There are different fire situations in different places. And of course, when we see the word fire, I think most people think it's something dangerous, but it could be helpful, which means maybe we have a campfire and we're using it to cook our hot dogs or our marshmallows, or a fire is being used in a factory to produce products and things like that. But yeah, fires can be both helpful and dangerous. But today we're going to be focusing on the dangerous context of fires.
So fire heats our homes and cooks our food, but it can also destroy almost anything in its path. Therefore, when it comes to fire safety, it's important to separate fact from fiction in order to know what to do in case of an emergency. So basically, the first sentence says that fire can be good or bad because we can use it to make our homes more comfortable by making it warmer. We can also use it to cook food, to prepare our meals. But since fire is very potent, it's very strong, it can also destroy anything. It can destroy our homes, it can burn our furniture, our appliances, anything in its path. So that's why it's important to know about fire safety. And in order to know about fire safety, you also have to know how to tell what's fact and what's fiction apart from one another.
So yes, indeed, there are some things that are true about fires, and there are some things that are not true about fires. And a lot of people probably think a lot of things about fires that are not true, and therefore that will be a very dangerous situation if they keep on thinking about those things if a fire comes. So indeed, we're going to separate fact from fiction, and we're doing that in case of an emergency. In case of means if something happens. If there's a fire, again, at home, at school, or at work, you better know what to do, and you better not have some false information.
Right. For instance, I could say, in case of a heart attack, call 119 immediately, which means, of course, in order to be prepared for something that might happen, if you may have a heart attack, which hopefully nobody will have, then that is the thing to do. You call 119 so that an emergency, an ambulance will come immediately.
Like here in Taiwan, of course, in Taipei especially, I always bring an umbrella with me in case it rains, because especially here in Taipei, it does rain quite a bit. You don't want to get all wet if you don't have an umbrella. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part, and we're going to talk about the smell of smoke.
Will the smell of smoke wake me up? As most fires happen at night, people often think that their sense of smell will wake them up in time to flee. However, this isn't always true. In fact, by the time you smell smoke, it might already be too late, which is why having a functional smoke detector is crucial. Indeed, keeping your smoke detector in working order could mean the difference between life and death.
第二部分我们看到动词 flee， 意思是逃跑或逃避。例如 The robber fled as soon as the alarm went off. 警报一响，小偷就逃跑了。或是 Refugees are fleeing the country because of the war. 由于这场战争，难民正逃离该国。接下来我们看到单字 functional， 它是形容词，指的是正常运作的、实用的、功能性的。例如 I had to return the cell phone because it wasn't functional. 我必须退回这只手机，因为它无法正常运作。或是 This jacket may not be pretty, but it's warm and functional. 这件夹克可能不漂亮，但它保暖又实用。另外补充这个字的名词 function, F-U-N-C-T-I-O-N, function, 它的意思是功能、功用。举例来说One of the main functions of a bird's feathers is to help it fly. 鸟的羽毛其中一个主要功能是帮助它飞行。再举一个例子 The app has quite a few functions. 那款应用程式有很多功能。再来我们看到单字 detector， 它是名词，指的是侦测器或探测器。例如 To be safe, you should have a smoke detector in your apartment.为了保险起见，你应该在你的公寓里安装烟雾侦测器。另外，补充这个字的动词 detect, D-E-T-E-C-T, detect， 它的意思是侦测或探测。例如 The scientists detected a lot of pollution in the water. 科学家侦测出水里有许多污染物。又或者说 The security system detected movement outside the home.保全系统侦测到屋外有动静。最后我们看到形容词 crucial， 指的是至关重要的或关键性的。举例来说 Several crucial parts were missing from the device. 那台装置里有好几个至关重要的零件不见了。最后一个例子 Sesame oil is a crucial ingredient in this dish. 芝麻油是这道料理的关键材料。
Will the smell of smoke wake me up? As most fires happen at night, people often think that their sense of smell will wake them up in time to flee. So it may be true, in fact, that a lot of fires happen at night because during the day people are awake. So if there are minor fires starting, if somebody smells a little bit of smoke, then they'll put out the fire immediately. But at night, everyone's sleeping, so that allows more time for fires to develop. And as more fires happen at night, people often think that they'll be able to smell it, even though they're sleeping, that they'll be awakened by the smell of smoke. And that'll give them enough time to flee. To flee means to escape from a dangerous situation. So a lot of people might try to flee their homes during an earthquake or during flooding. And fleeing is something that people do last minute. They run away from a dangerous situation.
Right, to flee is the present tense. Fled is the past tense. I fled from the robbers when they tried to take away my money. But in this particular case, people think that, hey, I'm going to smell the smoke. I don't have anything to worry about. If there's a fire, I'll smell the smoke. I'll be able to wake up in time and I will escape. However, this isn't always true. It might be true in some situations, but it's not always true. In fact, by the time you smell smoke, it might already be too late, which is why having a functional smoke detector is crucial. So indeed, sometimes you will smell the smoke, but in a lot of cases, in a lot of situations, it may be too late. The smoke will wake you up, but by that time, the fire will have spread throughout the house, and you're in trouble. You're going to lose everything, including your life.
Right, and that's why you need a functional smoke detector. So a smoke detector is a piece of equipment that checks if smoke is present. That's what a detector is. A detector is a piece of equipment that checks if a particular thing is present. So you can also have a metal detector. You can use a metal detector on the beach to check for pieces of metal in the sand, or some police officers use lie detectors to see if somebody is telling the truth. They attach little wires to somebody's body, and those wires transmit frequencies to this piece of equipment, and the equipment tells if somebody is telling the truth or not. But here we're talking about a smoke detector, and the smoke detector has to be functional, which means that it has to work. If it's broken or it's run out of battery, then it's going to be useless.
Exactly. So I think you can tell by the little indicator light on the smoke detector. If it keeps flashing, say every 30 seconds or so, then the smoke detector is functional. It's working. And you do, of course, need to change the batteries from time to time. And yes, this is crucial. It's very, very important, because if you don't take this into consideration, if your smoke detector is not working, it could be a life-threatening situation.
Yes, indeed, keeping your smoke detector in working order could mean the difference between life and death. So you have to make sure that your smoke detector works, that it's in working order. Something that's in working order just means it works properly and it won't let you down when you actually need it. And making sure that your smoke detector is in working order could mean the difference between life and death. So if something means the difference between life and death, it means that it could decide whether it's a life or death situation. So in other words, it's very important because you could end up being saved or dying from it.
Exactly. And of course, you need to be reminded that there are different ways fires can start, and it just might happen to you. Of course, we certainly don't hope it does, but we need to be prepared ahead of time. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part. We've got another question in the third part. Should I call the fire department immediately when I smell smoke? Let's find out what this paragraph tells us about that.
Should I call the fire department immediately when I smell smoke? No. If possible, escaping should always be your first priority. When a fire breaks out, it can spread quite rapidly, leaving you only seconds to get to safety. Therefore, it's best to use any time you have to get yourself and your loved ones out of the burning building before calling the fire department.
So the second question is also a very good question. Should I call the fire department immediately when I smell smoke? A lot of us might do that. That might be the first reaction that we have when we smell smoke. However, that's actually not what we should do. If possible, escaping should always be your first priority. So instead of calling the fire department, you should try to escape first. Escaping should be your priority. So a priority is something that's really important and that must be done before anything else is done. It's the thing that needs attention the most.
Yep, you need to flee. You need to get out of there. You need to escape. That should be your first priority. Of course, we have priorities in our lives, where we're going to study, what kind of jobs we're going to do. You need to set your priorities when you're young so that you're successful in the future. And of course, this should be your first priority, the thing you should do first. And when a fire breaks out, it can spread quite rapidly, leaving you only seconds to get to safety. So when a fire starts, we could also describe it as breaking out. To break out just means something suddenly happens and it happens quickly, like the pandemic sort of broke out at the end of 2019 and it spread throughout the world. And so here we're talking about a fire starting. It breaks out and it can be very dangerous and it can spread quite rapidly or quite quickly.
Yes, the phrasal verb break out usually refers to something negative. You can say a war broke out, and as Roger mentioned, a disease such as COVID-19 broke out. Also, violence broke out. You wouldn't use break out for something positive, like happiness doesn't break out. Happiness spreads.
Right. When I was 16, of course, my face broke out with acne, as it does for a lot of young kids. And that means you get a lot of zits and a lot of pimples, as we call them. But in this particular case, the fire breaks out, and of course, it can spread quite quickly, quite rapidly. And as a result, you'll only have a few seconds to get to safety. So you probably don't have time to call the fire department to have them come over to try to put out the fire. You better get your hiney out of there as fast as possible.
Therefore, it's best to use any time you have to get yourself and your loved ones out of the burning building before calling the fire department. So instead of fumbling for your phone and trying to call the fire department, escape from the fire situation. Escape and bring your loved ones, your pets, and try to get out of the building, get out of your house, and then call the fire department.
Right, so get yourself out. Make sure that you get out of that building or that home or whatever. Get yourself out. Also, your loved ones, which would be your immediate family members. And of course, if you're at work and a fire breaks out, you could probably try to help get your coworkers and your colleagues out of that fire as well. And of course, only then, when you've gotten out of the building, should you call the fire department. And they should be coming over quite quickly to put that fire out. But of course, your safety should be your priority. Get out of that fire first, then ring the fire department or the fire brigade, as it's called in some parts of the world. So again, we had a couple of questions today. The first one was, will the smell of smoke wake me up? And the answer to that question is, well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Make sure you have a functional smoke detector. That is crucial.
Right. I remember when I was living in America in an apartment, all of the apartment units had to have functional smoke detectors. So if the smoke detector wasn't functioning, then we had to tell the management office, and somebody came once a year to check if the smoke detector was functioning, whether it was functional. And that's very important because if you live in a building that's over 20 floors high and there are so many units, it's important to have smoke detectors in each unit. Otherwise, if a fire breaks out in one apartment, then everybody on that same floor or the floors above and below can also be affected. So when you hear a smoke detector go off, and sometimes these smoke detectors go off very easily, even when I'm cooking something like frying meat or making French fries in the kitchen, the smoke detector will go off. off, and that shows me that it's functional. And then I'll have to turn it off, and sometimes the neighbor will knock on my door and say, "What happened?" And they're ready to flee the building, and I just say, "Well, sorry, I was just making some French fries. Would you like some?"
And of course, when we're talking about smelling smoke, you might wonder if you need to call the fire department immediately when you do smell that smoke. And we said, no, you should escape, you should flee. That should be your first priority. If that fire breaks out, you got to get out of there as fast as possible. You need to leave rapidly. And of course, you need to get yourself and your loved ones out of the burning building. And then you can pick up your cell phone and ring the fire department, and they'll be there to save the day. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's turn things now over to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始写到 Depending on the context, fire can be both helpful and dangerous. 根据所处的情况，火可能既有益又危险。好，文中它用到 depending on， 这是独立分词片语，相当于 according to， 可以用来表达取决于什么什么，根据什么什么来看。那么它后面呢是可以接名词或名词子句，像我们课文里面它说 depending on the context， 就是用来表达说根据所处的情况，所以它是在 depending on 后面加名词。好，那注意 context 在这边不是指上下文哦，而是指背景环境，可能是某个事件的背景环境。接着我们也来造一个用 depending on 加上名词子句的例句，像 This cake can serve 4 to 6 people, depending on how you slice it. 这个蛋糕可以供4到6个人享用，取决于你的切法，就看你怎么切。好，那这边补充一下片语动词 depend on 或是 depend upon 的用法。depend on 或是 depend upon 后面可以接人或事物。那么常见的意思有2种，第一种呢可以表达取决于什么什么，是什么什么而定，像是 We're not sure if we will go picnicking. It depends on the weather. 我们不确定是否会去野餐，这要视天气而定。那第二个语义是表达仰赖依靠，那这时候意思就会跟 rely on 差不多。举例来说Jennifer used to depend on her husband to drive her everywhere. Jennifer 以前都是仰赖她先生载她去各个地方。好，那我们接着读到课文第一部分的最后一句，说到消防安全时，重要的是要区分事实和虚构，以便在紧急情况下知道该怎么做。那文中他用 When it comes to fire safety来表达说到消防安全啊，怎么样怎么样怎么样。那么 when it comes to 就可以表达提到什么，就什么而论，谈到什么。这个片语通常是用来引导一个话题，来带出跟主题相关的资讯。注意其中的 to 是介系词，所以我后面是要接名词或动名词。那 when it comes to 加上名词或动名词，这部分你可以把它摆在句中或是句首。好，举例来说It's important to know your limits when it comes to swimming. 说到游泳啊，知道自己的极限在哪是很重要的哦。好，那我们也补充一下 speaking of 这个片语介系词呢，是用来引出跟前文相关的其他话题，表达提到说到什么什么。那么后面是接名词或动名词。好，那我们看个例句会比较清楚。假设朋友聊到食物，那你刚好肚子饿了，想去吃点东西，这时候也许就可以说Speaking of food, I'm getting hungry. Let's go grab a bite. 说到食物，我肚子饿了，我们去吃点东西吧。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Versus. After comparing the costs of renting versus buying a home, Carlos decided to continue renting. Fiction. Jesse prefers books about actual historical events over works of fiction. Context.A full understanding of World War II requires an understanding of the context in which it occurred. Flee. When it heard the hunter approaching, the deer fled into the dark forest. Functional. After being repaired, the phone is now fully functional again. Crucial. The doctor's quick actions were crucial to saving the patient's life. Priority. Finishing the essay on time is my top priority right now.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.